My name is Monica. I'm 30 years old, and I work as a software engineer. The family home in Burlington, Vermont, where I had lived alongside my parents for so many years, had always meant the world to me. It wasn't just a house. It was everything. I had invested my heart and soul into this place, genuinely believing that it would remain my sanctuary forever, my one safe refuge in an uncertain world. Every single wall, every door, every corner of that home carried the enormous weight of my efforts, my dedication, and the dreams I had carefully nurtured over the years. Then, during what should have been an ordinary dinner, my mother suddenly slammed her fork down against the table with force. The sharp, metallic sound sliced through the quiet room like a judge's gavel passing a final sentence. "You have 48 hours to get your stuff out," she screamed at me, her voice filled with anger. "That house is your sister's now." My father simply nodded in agreement, his eyes remaining fixed firmly on his plate, refusing to meet my gaze. And my sister, who had been living thousands of miles away in California for years, barely showing any interest or care about this home or our family, was suddenly being handed absolutely everything on a silver platter. I looked around the familiar rooms of the house, memories flooding back as I remembered precisely how I had carried its weight on my shoulders, cared for every single corner with devotion, and kept it standing as a real, warm home rather than just an empty structure. All those sacrifices I had made, all the tremendous effort I had poured into this place, all wiped away in a single cruel sentence from my mother's lips. The one person who had given nothing, who had contributed nothing, was being rewarded with everything, while I was being cast aside as if I had never belonged here at all, as if my years of dedication meant absolutely nothing. I froze in my chair, unable to move or speak. My heart pounded wildly in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears. The air around me felt thick, heavy, and suffocating, pressing down on me from all sides. Their harsh words cut into me like sharp knives, piercing and painful. But I quickly realized that arguing with them would be completely pointless. They had already made up their minds. I rose quietly from my chair, pushing it back slowly, and walked to my bedroom. I gripped my phone tightly in my hand, my knuckles turning white, and I began to formulate a plan, something they would never see coming, never anticipate. They genuinely thought I would just walk away quietly, pack my things, and disappear without a fight. They were wrong. Dead wrong. In 48 hours, when my sister finally stepped inside that house, when she crossed that threshold thinking she had one, she would desperately wish she had never set foot in it. Before we continue with this story, I want to know what time it is right now where you are, and which city are you watching this from? Please leave a comment below so I can see just how far my story has traveled across the world. The next morning arrived, and I woke up in our Burlington home, the crushing weight of my mother's devastating words still pressing down heavily on my shoulders. I had spent countless years making this house truly ours, genuinely believing deep down that it represented a shared promise between all of us, a family bond made permanent through brick and mortar. Living there with my parents, I had willingly taken on their burdens, their problems, their struggles, pouring my heart and my hard-earned savings into every corner of that home without hesitation. After their catastrophic financial crash 5 years ago, a disaster that nearly destroyed them completely, I immediately stepped up to help. My software engineering job paid quite well, so I took it upon myself to cover the mortgage payments, eventually paying a staggering $80,000 over the course of 3 long years when they simply couldn't manage it themselves. I didn't hesitate for even a moment. This was our home, the place where I had grown up, where every single memory felt sacred and precious to me. I still vividly remember that terrible day when the bank called, threatening foreclosure with cold efficiency. My father sat slumped at the kitchen table, his head buried in his hands, papers scattered everywhere around him in chaotic disorder. My mother paced back and forth across the kitchen floor, her voice tight and strained with overwhelming worry and fear. "We're going to lose everything we have," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. I couldn't allow that to happen, Couldn't stand by and watch our family home slip away. I completely drained my savings account, worked endless overtime hours until I was exhausted, and methodically paid off the loan, every single dollar of it. The profound relief that washed over their faces when I told them the house was saved made it all seem worth it at the time, or so I naively thought back then. I personally painted the living room a warm, inviting beige color, carefully replaced the old warped floorboards that had been squeaking for years, and fixed the creaky stairs that had driven us all crazy. Every single nail I hammered into place felt like a solemn promise, a commitment to keep our family together, to maintain our unity. My sister, though, was essentially a ghost in our lives, living out in California. She would call maybe twice a year if we were lucky, always claiming she was far too busy with her demanding marketing job to visit or help. When I occasionally mentioned the mortgage situation to her, trying to explain the financial burden I was carrying, she just laughed it off dismissively. "That's your thing, Monica," she said to me once during a rare phone call, her voice absolutely dripping with dismissal and indifference, as if my struggles meant nothing to her. I sent her photographs of the newly renovated living room, showing off the new curtains I had hung and the plush sofa I had saved up for months to buy, hoping she might show some interest or appreciation. She didn't even bother to reply to my messages. I tried to tell myself repeatedly that it didn't matter, that her lack of response didn't hurt. I convinced myself I was doing all of this for us, for the entire family unit, not for recognition or thanks. I would walk through the quiet house late at night, gently touching the walls I had painted with my own hands, feeling deeply like they were truly mine, that I had earned my place here. But looking back now, I can see there were serious cracks forming beneath the surface of our family dynamic, warning signs I completely missed. My parents began leaning on me more and more with each passing year, their dependence growing steadily. My mother would casually ask me for just a little help with various bills, and I would immediately cover them without complaint. My father completely stopped working after being laid off from his job, and I ended up paying for his car repairs, his insurance, his expenses. I honestly didn't mind doing it, at least not back then. I genuinely thought we were functioning as a team, that we were all in this together. I would sit contentedly in the living room, the very room I had transformed and made cozy with carefully chosen throw pillows and a soft, expensive rug, and I would imagine growing old in this house, perhaps even raising my own children here someday, continuing the family legacy. The house wasn't simply a building made of wood and nails to me. It represented my concrete proof that I was capable, that I could hold things together when they threatened to fall apart, that I was valuable and necessary. Looking back now with clear eyes, I realize I completely missed all the warning signs that were right in front of me. My mother's phone calls to my sister gradually grew longer and longer, her tone becoming noticeably softer and more affectionate when speaking with her than it ever was with me. My father would frequently mention her life out in California, talking about her professional success with a deep pride in his voice that I never, ever heard when he spoke about my accomplishments or my contributions. I brushed it all off, dismissing my growing concerns, telling myself firmly it was perfectly normal, that I was just being paranoid or oversensitive. They were my parents, after all. They would never actually push me out, never betray me like that. But last night's dinner conversation proved me completely, devastatingly wrong. Their sudden decision to hand the entire house over to my sister wasn't merely unfair or unjust. It was a brutal slap across the face, a complete rejection of everything I had done. Every dollar I had spent, every exhausting hour I had worked, every sacrifice I had made, all of it felt stolen from me, taken and given to someone who hadn't earned it. I walked slowly into the living room, staring intensely at the sofa I had personally bought with my own money. It wasn't just a piece of furniture sitting there. It was mine, purchased with my hard-earned overtime paychecks. The television, the washing machine, the beautiful curtains hanging in the windows, all of it was mine, bought and paid for by me. If they truly wanted me out of this house, if they were determined to throw me away like garbage, then I would make absolutely certain they felt the full impact of what I had given them, what they were throwing away so carelessly. My sister hadn't lifted a single finger to help maintain or improve this house, but she would supposedly be walking into a beautiful home that I had essentially built and maintained. Not if I had anything to say about it. Not if I could possibly help it. I pulled out my laptop computer, and I noticed my hands were now steady and calm. My initial shock transforming into cold determination. I wasn't going to beg them to reconsider, and I certainly wasn't going to cry or plead for fairness. Instead, I would show them all exactly, precisely what they were so carelessly throwing away, what they were losing by choosing her over me. By early afternoon of that devastating day, I desperately needed some answers, some clarity about my situation and my rights. So I immediately dialed Kristen, my very best friend since our undergraduate college days together at the University of Vermont. She has become a lawyer now, blessed with a razor-sharp mind and a practical, no-nonsense attitude that I deeply value. I knew she would tell me the truth, even if it hurt to hear it. Kristen has always been my go-to person when life gets complicated and overwhelming. Sitting there on my bed, completely surrounded by the familiar walls of our Burlington family home, the same walls I had known my entire life, I poured out every detail of the chaos and devastation from last night's terrible dinner. I told her exactly how my mother had violently slammed her fork down on the table, her harsh voice cutting through the air like a blade with that brutal 48-hour ultimatum, and how my father had just sat there in silence, passively letting her hand over the entire house to my sister without any protest whatsoever. Kristen didn't interrupt me once during my emotional outpouring. She just listened carefully, her calm, steady focus somehow grounding me, keeping me from completely falling apart. "Do you have any legal papers for the house?" she asked, her tone immediately shifting to all business, that professional lawyer voice I knew so well. "Anything at all from your parents, or from anyone before them?" I immediately mentioned my grandfather, who had owned this very place before he passed away 2 years ago. I had always assumed, always believed without question, that the property had gone directly to my parents after his death. That's what they had told me, or at least what they had implied. Kristen went completely quiet for a long moment on the other end of the line, and I could practically hear her mind working. "Give me an hour," she finally said, her voice taking on a tone of determination. "I'll check something important." I spent that entire hour feeling completely restless, pacing back and forth along the hallway, my mind racing uncontrollably with thoughts and possibilities. My grandfather's weathered face kept flashing repeatedly in my head. Those kind eyes, his weathered, work-worn hands, his gravelly voice telling me countless stories on the front porch about how he had built this very house brick by brick with his own hands decades ago. He would look directly at me, his eyes crinkling warmly at the corners with affection, and say with absolute conviction, "Monica, this place will always be yours, sweetheart." I had smiled every time he said it, thinking innocently it was just his special way of making me feel important and loved. Now, standing here alone, I wasn't so sure it had been just empty words anymore. I dug frantically through an old cardboard box tucked away in the back of my closet, pulling out faded photographs of him standing proudly by the massive oak tree in the front yard, his strong arm wrapped protectively around my shoulders when I was just a child. The memory stung, sharp and raw, cutting deep, knowing that my parents had so easily dismissed it all, dismissed his love for me and his wishes. Kristen called back exactly when promised, her voice tight and urgent with barely contained energy. "Monica, you're not going to believe what I found. You're absolutely not going to believe this." She explained quickly that she had immediately reached out to a trusted colleague who specialized in estate law and had managed to track down my grandfather's official will at the Chittenden County Clerk's office downtown. My parents had never mentioned its existence to me, not even once in the 2 years since his death. Kristen began reading the document over the phone to me, and each word she spoke hit me like a physical hammer blow to my chest. My beloved grandfather had left the house to me alone and no one else, not to my parents, not to my sister. The will was properly signed, notarized, and officially filed 3 full years before he died, clearly naming me as the sole heir to the Burlington property, with no ambiguity whatsoever. I sank down onto the bed, my legs suddenly unable to support me, my hands trembling violently. How did I not know about this? I whispered, my voice breaking with emotion. How could I not have known? Kristen's voice turned cold and hard, filled with anger on my behalf. Your parents had complete access to the will, Monica. They absolutely knew about it. They deliberately chose to keep it hidden from you. The truth of what she was saying was like a devastating punch to the gut, knocking all the air from my lungs. My father and mother, the 2 people I had trusted with my entire life, had intentionally hidden my grandfather's final wish, his dying wish, specifically so they could give the house to my sister instead. I saw everything so clearly now, all the pieces falling into place with horrible clarity. Their long, private phone calls with her that they would take in another room, their obvious pride in her California life and career that they never showed for my accomplishments, their deafening silence about my enormous sacrifices and contributions. They had watched me pour $80,000 of my hard-earned money into this place, watched me fix every broken piece, every problem, and they still fully planned to hand it all over to someone who hadn't even set foot in this house in years. My chest tightened painfully, a terrible mix of burning anger and deep hurt swirling together. This wasn't simply unfairness or favoritism anymore. This was a deliberate, calculated stab in the back, a complete betrayal of absolutely everything I had believed about family, about trust, about love. I stood up from the bed, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt, and walked with determined steps to the kitchen. My grandfather's old coffee mug sat there on the counter where I kept it, a chipped relic I had carefully preserved after his death. Holding it gently in my hands, I vividly remembered his promise to me, his unwavering belief in me as a person. They had actively tried to erase that precious memory, to completely rewrite his legacy for their own selfish reasons. Why had they done this? Was it because my sister had a family of her own? Was it because they thought I was weak and would just passively accept their decision? I wasn't entirely sure of their reasoning, but ultimately it didn't matter anymore. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and I absolutely wasn't going to let them win this battle. Kristen's voice broke through my racing thoughts, pulling me back to the present moment. This will is ironclad, Monica, she said firmly. You have strong legal rights to this house. We can definitely challenge this situation successfully. Her confident words were like a lifeline being thrown to a drowning person, pulling me out of the thick fog of confusion and despair. I didn't know exactly what specific steps to take yet, but I knew with absolute certainty I wasn't walking away from this, wasn't giving up what was rightfully mine. I grabbed a spiral notebook from the kitchen drawer, my hand steadier now with purpose and determination, and started methodically listing everything I could possibly use as evidence. Bank statements showing all my payments, receipts for every repair and improvement, concrete proof of all my financial contributions over the years. Kristen promised to meet me first thing the next morning to carefully map out all our available options together. She briefly mentioned a few specific legal steps we could potentially take, like filing a formal claim to enforce the will in court. But she emphasized we needed to act extremely fast before my parents could do anything else. My parents clearly thought they had completely blindsided me, that I would simply pack up my belongings quietly and leave without a fight. They had absolutely no idea whatsoever what I was truly capable of doing when pushed to my limit. I sat down at the kitchen table, pen gripped firmly in my hand, mentally and emotionally ready to fight with everything I had for what was rightfully mine. The next morning arrived, and I woke up very early, my notebook still lying open from last night's intensive planning session. My parents were already gone, having left early to visit some friends in Montpelier, leaving the entire house quiet and empty. I stood alone in the living room, staring hard at the sofa I had bought with my very first big paycheck for my engineering job, a beautiful plush gray piece that had taken me months and months of careful saving to afford. If I was truly being forced out of this house against my will, I absolutely wasn't leaving my personal belongings behind for my sister to claim as her own, to enjoy without having earned them. I grabbed a pen and fresh paper and started carefully listing every single item I had personally paid for over the years. The flat-screen television mounted prominently on the wall, the expensive stainless steel washing machine down in the basement that I had researched for weeks before purchasing, the custom curtains I had picked out specifically to match perfectly with the warm beige paint I had personally rolled onto these walls myself. Each item on that growing list felt like a tangible piece of me, concrete proof of my years of dedication, keeping this house not just standing, but actually alive and beautiful. I called Kristen to finalize our legal strategy and get her professional advice. She was already at her law office despite the early hour, her voice crisp and professional over the phone connection. "We'll file a formal claim to enforce your grandfather's will," she explained methodically. "It's actually fairly straightforward legally, but we absolutely need solid proof of your contributions and your connection to the property to strengthen the case even further." I pulled out a thick folder absolutely stuffed with receipts, every single one carefully saved over the years. Every purchase I had made, every repair I had paid for, every dollar I had spent on this house was documented in that folder. Kristen strongly suggested getting a notarized affidavit prepared to officially document my extensive financial role in maintaining and improving the property, and we quickly agreed to meet later that same day to review and sign it together. I felt a powerful surge of control washing over me, like I was finally, truly taking back what rightfully belonged to me after all this time. But first, before anything else, I needed to secure my personal belongings and get them out of this house. I immediately searched online for reputable moving companies operating in the Burlington area and eventually found Green Mountain Movers, a well-established local outfit with genuinely good customer reviews across multiple platforms. I called their office and spoke directly to a guy named Tom, carefully explaining that I needed a rush job completed as soon as possible. "Can you do it today?" I asked, my voice firm and unwavering, leaving no room for negotiation. He hesitated for just a moment, clearly checking his schedule, then finally agreed to send a truck to my address by noon. I gave him the detailed list of items I needed moved: the flat-screen TV, the gray sofa, the stainless steel washing machine, along with a few smaller items like the microwave I had purchased and my personal bedroom dresser. "This is all personal property," I told him clearly and directly. "I'm taking only what's rightfully mine." Tom didn't ask any probing questions or request any explanations, just professionally confirmed the address and quoted me a fair price for the expedited service. I hung up the phone, my pulse steady and strong, knowing deep down this was absolutely the right move to make. While waiting for the movers to arrive, I walked methodically through every room of the house, double-checking my carefully prepared list to ensure I hadn't forgotten anything important. The large kitchen table, a cherished hand-me-down from my grandfather that held so many memories, wasn't mine to take since it had belonged to him originally, but the 6 matching chairs surrounding it had been purchased just last year after my mother had complained bitterly about the old, worn-out ones. I tagged those chairs with bright sticky notes, clearly marking what would stay in the house and what would be going with me. The entire process was methodical and systematic, almost calming in its precision, like I was carefully reclaiming pieces of my life one item at a time. I deliberately avoided thinking too much about my parents or my sister during this process, focusing instead completely on the immediate task at hand. Every single item I marked with a note was a powerful reminder to myself that this was my work, my hard-earned money, my contributions that had made this place a home. Around 10 o'clock in the morning, the doorbell suddenly rang, interrupting my focused work. It was Mrs. Linda, our kind neighbor from directly across the street, a sweet woman in her mid-60s who always faithfully brought us homemade cookies every Christmas without fail. She had apparently seen me through the front window pacing back and forth and had come over to check in on me out of genuine concern. "You okay, Monica?" she asked gently, her eyes soft and filled with worry. I didn't tell her anything about the will or my parents' devastating decision to give the house to my sister. That still felt far too raw and painful to discuss openly, but I did admit honestly that I was in the process of moving some of my things out. "It's complicated," I said, forcing what I hoped was a convincing smile onto my face. She reached out and squeezed my arm reassuringly. "You've always been so good to this house, dear. Whatever's going on right now, you absolutely don't deserve to be treated badly." Her kind words hit me hard emotionally, and I had to blink back tears that threatened to fall, feeling deeply grateful for her unconditional support. Mr. William, another longtime neighbor who lived 2 houses down, stopped by soon after, his heavy work boots still dusty and dirty from his morning shift at the construction site. He had known my grandfather extremely well, and the two of them were always swapping detailed stories about their fishing trips to Lake Champlain. "This place meant a lot to him," he said thoughtfully, glancing around at the familiar surroundings with nostalgia. "And to you too, I imagine?" I nodded silently, completely unable to speak without my voice breaking with emotion. Their genuine kindness and concern gave me much-needed strength, a powerful reminder that I wasn't alone in this struggle, even if my own family had cruelly turned their backs on me. I thanked them both sincerely, promising to explain everything later when I was ready, and they left with quiet, understanding nods, leaving me alone to continue my work. The movers arrived promptly at noon as promised, a 3-man crew with a large white moving van. I walked them carefully through the entire house, pointing out each of the tagged items that needed to be loaded. They worked quickly and efficiently, hauling the heavy gray sofa and the flat-screen TV out to the waiting truck, wrapping the expensive washing machine in thick protective blankets to avoid any scratches or damage during transport. Watching them systematically carry my personal things out of the house felt incredibly strange and surreal, like I was actively dismantling my entire life piece by piece, but it also felt absolutely right and necessary. I wasn't going to give my sister a free ride, wasn't going to let her walk into a fully furnished home that I had paid for. Kristen called again during the moving process, confirming our meeting time later that afternoon and specifically reminding me to keep all receipts for the moving costs. "This documentation strengthens your legal case significantly," she explained professionally. I agreed completely, my resolve hardening like steel. By late morning, the house felt noticeably emptier and more hollow, but surprisingly, I felt stronger and more empowered than I had in days. My parents and my sister genuinely thought they could simply erase my place here, erase my contributions and my sacrifices. They were about to learn a very harsh lesson otherwise. By mid-afternoon, with the movers long gone, the house felt completely hollow and empty, my belongings removed and safely stored elsewhere. I stood alone in the bare living room, its empty walls echoing with the obvious absence of the sofa and TV I had taken with me. The heavy silence was suddenly broken by a sharp, aggressive knock at the front door. I walked over and opened it to find my sister Tara standing there on the porch, her expensive designer suitcase positioned at her feet, her eyes already narrowed, suspiciously like she already owned the entire place. She had clearly flown in directly from California, probably thinking confidently she would walk right into a fully furnished, beautiful home without any problems. I mentally braced myself, knowing instinctively this confrontation wouldn't be civil or pleasant. Tara rudely pushed past me without being invited in, her high heels clicking loudly on the hardwood floor I had refinished. "Where's everything?" she snapped immediately, her head swiveling as she scanned the noticeably empty living room with growing anger. Her voice was sharp and harsh, absolutely laced with entitlement and disbelief. I crossed my arms firmly across my chest, staying positioned by the door. "I took what's mine," I said calmly, keeping my tone carefully even and controlled. She spun around dramatically to face me, her face visibly flushing red with rage. "Yours? Mom and Dad said this house is mine now. You don't get to strip it completely bare like this." I stepped forward deliberately, my voice remaining steady but turning cold as ice. I personally paid for that sofa, the TV, the washing machine, literally everything I took with me. You didn't contribute a single dime to any of it. Her eyes widened in shock at my directness, but she stubbornly didn't back down at all. You think you're entitled just because you threw some money around here and there? She shot back defensively. This is my home now, Monica. You're out. Done. Finished. The air between us crackled with intense tension. I clenched my fists tightly at my sides, fighting hard against the powerful urge to shout and scream at her. You haven't even been here in years, I said, my voice rising slightly despite my efforts. I kept this entire place standing and functioning while you were off living your life in California, completely ignoring us, ignoring this family. Tara laughed then, a harsh, bitter, ugly sound that filled the empty room. Oh, please, Monica. You stayed here out of pity, playing the role of the good, dutiful daughter. Mom and Dad chose me for this house for a very good reason. Her cruel words cut deep into me, slicing like a knife, but I refused to flinch or show any weakness in front of her. They chose wrong, I said firmly, stepping even closer to her, refusing to back down. You don't know even half of what I've done for this family over the years. She stormed furiously through the entire house, checking every room, the kitchen, the basement, her face growing progressively redder with mounting anger with each empty corner she discovered. The chairs, the curtains, she yelled loudly, spinning back around to face me with wild eyes. You took absolutely everything. I held her gaze steadily, refusing to look away. Only what I personally paid for with my own money. You want a house? Then furnish it yourself. Tara's hands visibly shook as she hastily pulled out her phone, her voice trembling noticeably with pure rage. You're absolutely unbelievable, Monica. I'm calling Mom and Dad right now. They'll deal with you properly. I simply shrugged casually, leaning back against the wall with apparent calm. Go ahead and call them. They're not here anyway. She froze completely, looking confused and thrown off. What do you mean they're not here? I didn't elaborate or explain further, just stood there silently and watched as she dialed frantically, her fingers fumbling clumsily with the phone. Tara paced anxiously back and forth in the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, her voice rising higher and higher as she spoke directly to my mother. She gutted the entire place, Mom. It's completely empty. There's nothing here. I stayed completely silent, letting her rant and rave without interruption. She finally hung up, turning to glare intensely at me with pure hatred. They're coming back from Montpelier tonight, she said, her tone absolutely venomous and threatening. You're done, Monica. Finished. I didn't respond at all to her threat, just calmly pointed toward the front door. You know where the exit is. She grabbed her expensive suitcase roughly, muttering angrily under her breath, and stormed out dramatically, slamming the door behind her so hard the entire frame rattled violently. I stood there motionless in the empty house, my heart pounding rapidly in my chest, but my resolve remaining absolutely firm and unshakable. Tara genuinely thought she could just waltz in here and claim everything without consequences. She had absolutely no idea whatsoever what was coming next for her and my parents. I locked the front door securely, ready and prepared for the next move in this escalating situation. That evening, I found myself at Kristen's comfortable apartment located in downtown Burlington, my belongings now safely stored in a nearby storage unit I had rented. My phone buzzed relentlessly and constantly, my mother's name flashing repeatedly on the screen with call after call. I deliberately let every call go straight to voicemail, knowing exactly what was coming and what she would say. Tara had clearly called them back from Montpelier, and now they were finally facing the serious consequences of their own terrible choices. I wasn't ready to hear their voices directly, not yet anyway. Instead of answering, I sat calmly sipping hot coffee at Kristen's kitchen counter, the enormous weight of the past 2 incredibly stressful days slowly settling deep into my bones. When I finally gathered the courage to play the accumulated voicemail messages, my mother's voice was absolutely shrill and almost unrecognizable in its panic. "Monica, what have you done? There's a complete stranger in our house claiming ownership." My father's deeper voice cut in suddenly, heavy with disbelief and confusion. "Some man claims he owns the property now. Explain yourself immediately." I didn't call them back, didn't respond at all. The truth was brutally simple. They had walked directly into a reality they themselves had created through their own deception. Kristen had worked incredibly fast, skillfully leveraging my grandfather's official will to push a strong legal claim that completely exposed their deception and lies. The house had been sold quietly but legally to a new owner, a local real estate investor who had jumped eagerly at the chance to buy a desirable Burlington property at a reasonable price. I hadn't personally orchestrated the actual sale myself, but I had definitely set the wheels in motion by legally enforcing my rightful inheritance rights. My phone rang yet again, this time showing my father's number. I answered it this time, keeping my voice carefully steady and controlled. "Dad, I'm not coming back," I said firmly before he could even speak. "You deliberately hid my grandfather's will from me. You tried to give my rightful home to Tara without my knowledge." He sputtered incoherently, his words tumbling out as a confused mix of anger and genuine shock. "We were protecting the family as a whole. You can't just—" I cut him off immediately, not letting him finish his excuse. "You protected Tara, not me. The will was absolutely clear and legal. This situation is entirely on you." I hung up decisively, my hands trembling slightly but my resolve remaining firm as steel. My mother called next almost immediately, her tone extremely sharp and full of accusation. "Monica, you're tearing this entire family apart. Come back and fix this mess you created." I took a long, deep breath, my voice turning cold as ice. "I'm completely done fixing your mistakes for you. Talk to Kristen about the will if you want answers." I ended the call abruptly, then silenced my phone entirely to stop the constant buzzing. Kristen sat across from me at her table, her laptop open, important papers spread out everywhere. "They're absolutely panicking," she said, her sharp eyes meeting mine. "The new owner has the official deed recorded. They can't undo this legally." I nodded slowly, staring down at my coffee mug, lost in thought. The house I had fought so hard for, the one I had poured my entire life into maintaining, was gone now, not because I had wanted it sold, but because my parents' terrible actions and deception had ultimately forced my hand. I felt a definite pang of loss deep in my chest, but also a strange, unexpected sense of relief washing over me. They had completely underestimated me, thought I would simply fold under pressure and accept their decision. They were absolutely wrong about that. My parents kept calling repeatedly, leaving increasingly desperate voicemail messages. "Monica, we're your family," my mother pleaded emotionally in one message. "You can't do this to us." I didn't respond to any of them. Each message felt like a heavy weight trying to drag me down, but I steadfastly refused to carry it anymore. My grandfather's will was my legal shield, concrete proof that this house was always meant for me alone. I wasn't the one who had broken trust and betrayed family. They were entirely responsible for that. As the long night wore on, slowly I sat with Kristen, carefully planning my next steps, knowing with absolute certainty I would never go back to that house or the toxic lies it represented. Months later, after everything had settled, I stood in my brand new apartment in Burlington, warm sunlight streaming beautifully through the large window. I had successfully built a complete life of my own, finally free from the crushing weight of my family's impossible expectations and demands. I had landed a great job at a local marketing firm, a small but vibrant company where my creative ideas were genuinely valued and appreciated. My days were now filled with productive meetings, quick coffee runs to the charming cafe down the street, and peaceful, quiet evenings spent arranging my furniture, my sofa, my TV, all the pieces I had fought so hard to keep. I hadn't spoken a single word to my parents or to Tara since that intense, emotional night at Kristen's apartment, and I had deliberately blocked all their phone numbers to maintain my peace. The silence was admittedly heavy and difficult at first, but it gave me precious space to breathe freely, to rediscover who I truly was without their constant shadow looming over me. I heard through a mutual friend we still had in common that Tara had scrambled desperately to buy a new house back in California. She had clearly expected to inherit our family home completely for free, but with it sold legally to someone else, she'd been forced to dip significantly into her personal savings to purchase property. "They chose wrong," I said firmly, taking a deliberate step closer to her, refusing to back down or show any weakness. "You don't know even half of what I've actually done for this family over the years." She stormed angrily through the entire house, her heels clicking rapidly as she checked every room. The kitchen, the basement, moving from space to space, her face growing progressively redder and more furious with each empty corner she discovered. "The chairs, the curtains!" she yelled loudly, spinning back around to face me with wild eyes. "You took absolutely everything." I held her gaze steadily, refusing to look away or apologize. "Only what I personally paid for with my own money," I stated clearly. "You want a house to live in? Then furnish it yourself with your own funds." Tara's hands visibly shook with rage as she pulled out her expensive smartphone from her designer purse, her voice trembling uncontrollably with fury. "You're unbelievable, Monica. I'm calling Mom and Dad right now. They'll deal with you properly." I simply shrugged casually, leaning back against the wall with my arms still crossed. "Go ahead and call them. They're not here anyway." She froze in place, looking confused and disoriented by my calm response. "What do you mean they're not here?" I didn't bother to elaborate or explain further, just stood there silently and watched as she frantically dialed, her fingers fumbling clumsily with the phone in her agitated state. Tara paced anxiously back and forth across the kitchen floor, phone pressed tightly to her ear, her voice rising higher and higher as she spoke to my mother on the other end. "She gutted the entire place, Mom. It's completely empty. There's nothing here." I stayed completely silent during her emotional rant, just letting her tell her version of the story. She finally hung up the phone, glaring at me with pure hatred burning in her eyes. "They're coming back from Montpelier tonight," she said, her tone absolutely venomous and threatening. "You're done, Monica. Finished." I didn't respond to her threat at all, just calmly pointed toward the front door with one hand. "You know where the exit is." She grabbed her expensive suitcase roughly, muttering angry words under her breath that I couldn't quite make out, and stormed out dramatically, slamming the door behind her so hard that the entire frame rattled violently. I stood there alone in the empty house, my heart pounding hard in my chest, but my resolve remaining absolutely firm and unshakable. Tara genuinely thought she could just waltz in here and claim everything without any consequences. She had absolutely no idea whatsoever what was coming next. I walked over and locked the front door securely, mentally preparing myself and getting ready for the next move in this battle. That evening, as darkness fell over Burlington, I found myself at Kristen's comfortable apartment located in the downtown area, my personal belongings now safely stored in a climate-controlled storage unit nearby. My phone buzzed relentlessly and constantly, my mother's name flashing repeatedly on the screen with incoming call after incoming call. I deliberately let every single call go straight to voicemail, knowing exactly what was coming, what she would say. Tara had obviously called them immediately, summoning them back from Montpelier, and now they were finally facing the real consequences of their choices and their deception. I wasn't ready to hear their voices directly yet. Wasn't prepared for that confrontation. Not yet. Instead, I sat quietly sipping hot coffee at Kristen's kitchen counter, the heavy weight of the past 2 exhausting days settling deeply into my bones. When I finally gathered the courage to play the accumulated voicemail messages, my mother's voice came through the speaker, sounding shrill and almost unrecognizable, completely different from her normal tone. "Monica, what have you done? There's a complete stranger in our house claiming ownership." My father's deep voice cut in next, heavy and thick with disbelief and confusion. "Some man claims he actually owns it now. You need to explain yourself immediately." I made the conscious decision not to call them back, not to engage with them yet. The truth of the situation was simple. They had walked directly into a harsh reality that they themselves had created through their own actions. Kristen had worked incredibly fast and efficiently, strategically leveraging my grandfather's will to push forward a strong legal claim that fully exposed their deception and lies. The house had been sold quietly but completely legally to a new owner, a local real estate investor who had jumped eagerly at the valuable chance to buy a desirable Burlington property at a fair price. I hadn't personally orchestrated the actual sale myself, but I had definitely set the wheels in motion, starting the process by legally enforcing my rightful inheritance rights as stated in my grandfather's will. My phone rang yet again, vibrating insistently on the counter, this time showing my father's name. I took a deep breath and answered, keeping my voice carefully steady and controlled. "Dad, I'm not coming back there," I said firmly before he could even speak or launch into whatever speech he had prepared. "You deliberately hid my grandfather's will from me. You actively tried to give away my home to Tara." He sputtered incoherently, his words tumbling out in a confused mix of anger and genuine shock. "We were protecting the family as a whole. You can't just—" I cut him off abruptly, not willing to hear his excuses. "You protected Tara specifically, not me. Never me." The will was absolutely clear about his intentions. "This entire situation is on you and Mom." I hung up the phone, decisively, my hands trembling slightly, but my resolve remaining completely firm and unshakable. My mother called next almost immediately, her tone sharp and cutting with accusation and blame. "Monica, you're deliberately tearing this entire family apart. Come back here right now and fix this mess you've created." I took a long, deep breath, forcing my voice to remain cold and detached. "I'm completely done fixing your mistakes and cleaning up after you. Talk to Kristen about the will if you want answers." I ended the call abruptly, then silenced my phone entirely, cutting off any further attempts to reach me. Kristen sat across from me at her kitchen table, her laptop open in front of her, various legal papers and documents spread out everywhere. "They're absolutely panicking right now," she said, her sharp eyes meeting mine with a mixture of satisfaction and concern. "The new owner has the deed officially filed. They can't undo this situation." I nodded slowly, staring down at my coffee mug, watching the steam rise. The house I had fought so hard for, the one I had poured my entire life and savings into maintaining and improving, was gone now, sold to someone else. It wasn't because I had wanted it sold. I had loved that house deeply, but because my parents' terrible actions and deception had ultimately forced my hand, leaving me no other viable choice. I felt a sharp pang of genuine loss, a sadness for what could have been, but also a strange sense of relief washing over me. They had severely underestimated me, foolishly thought I would simply fold under pressure and accept their decision quietly. They had been completely wrong about me. My parents kept calling obsessively throughout the evening, leaving voicemail after voicemail that grew increasingly more desperate with each message. "Monica, we're your family, your own flesh and blood," my mother pleaded emotionally in one particularly pathetic message. "You can't do this terrible thing to us." I didn't respond to any of them, didn't engage at all. Each message felt like a heavy weight trying to drag me back down, but I absolutely refused to carry it anymore, refused to bear the burden of their mistakes and lies. My grandfather's will was my legal shield, concrete proof and evidence that this house was always meant for me, that he had wanted me to have it. I wasn't the one who had broken the sacred trust between family members. They were entirely responsible for that betrayal. As the long night wore on slowly, I sat with Kristen at her table, carefully planning out my next steps and my future, knowing with absolute certainty I would never go back to that house or return to the lies and manipulation it held within its walls. Months later, on a beautiful sunny morning, I stood contentedly in my new apartment in Burlington, warm sunlight streaming through the large window and filling the space with natural light. I had successfully built a completely new life of my own, finally free from the crushing weight of my family's unreasonable expectations and constant demands. I had landed a good job at a small but vibrant local marketing firm, a welcoming company where my creative ideas were genuinely valued and appreciated by my colleagues and supervisors. My days were now filled with productive meetings, pleasant coffee runs to the charming cafe down the street, and quiet, peaceful evenings spent arranging my furniture just the way I wanted it, my comfortable sofa, my flat-screen TV, all the pieces I had fought so hard to keep as my own. I hadn't spoken a single word to my parents or to Tara since that emotionally charged night at Kristen's apartment, and I had deliberately blocked all their phone numbers to prevent any contact. The silence between us was heavy and somewhat sad at first, weighing on my conscience occasionally, but it had given me the precious space I desperately needed to breathe freely, to rediscover who I actually was as a person without constantly living under their oppressive shadow. I heard through a mutual friend who still maintained contact with both sides that Tara had scrambled frantically to buy a new house back in California, spending far more than she had planned. She had fully expected to inherit our family home completely for free, to just walk in and take possession without any cost, but with it now sold to someone else entirely, she had been forced to dip significantly into her personal savings, money she had been carefully keeping for other purposes. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. She had wanted everything handed to her effortlessly, and instead she had ended up having to work and pay for it herself, just like everyone else. I had also heard, through that same friend, that my parents had been forced to find a small rental property to live in, something much more modest than the family home they had lost. They had never planned for this outcome, had never imagined that their scheme to give the house to Tara would backfire so spectacularly. They had always assumed I would simply accept their decision, that I was too passive or too devoted to them to fight back. They had learned, in the harshest way possible, that they were wrong about me. My relationship with Kristen had grown even stronger through this entire ordeal. She had been my rock, my advocate, my voice of reason when everything felt like it was falling apart around me. We met regularly for coffee now, sometimes talking about the case and its aftermath, sometimes just enjoying each other's company and discussing normal, everyday things. She had never once judged me for the decisions I made, never suggested I should have handled things differently. She understood that sometimes standing up for yourself means burning bridges with people you love. I started going to therapy shortly after everything settled down, recognizing that I needed professional help to process the betrayal and the loss. My therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Sarah Chin, helped me understand that what my parents did wasn't just unfair. It was a form of emotional abuse, using my love and loyalty against me while favoring my sister, who had contributed nothing. She helped me see that setting boundaries, even painful ones, was an act of self-preservation, not selfishness. Through therapy, I began to understand patterns I had never noticed before, how I had always been the one expected to sacrifice, to give, to accommodate, while Tara was allowed to live her life freely without any obligations to the family. How my parents had taken my devotion for granted, assuming it would last forever no matter how they treated me. How I had confused love with obligation, thinking that being a good daughter meant accepting whatever they demanded of me. I also came to realize that my grandfather had seen all of this, had understood the family dynamics better than I had. That's why he had specifically left the house to me in his will, not to my parents, not to be divided between Tara and me, but to me alone. He had known I was the one who would need it, who would appreciate it, who would actually make it a home rather than just a piece of property. He had tried to protect me, and my parents had deliberately undermined his final wishes for their own reasons. As I settled into my new life, I found myself making new friends, people who didn't know anything about the family drama, who saw me as just Monica, not as the dutiful daughter or the betrayed sister. I joined a book club at the local library, started taking yoga classes at a studio near my apartment, and even began volunteering at a community center on weekends. For the first time in years, I was living for myself, making choices based on what I wanted rather than what was expected of me. My career flourished in ways I hadn't anticipated. Without the constant stress and emotional drain of dealing with my family's problems, I found I had more energy and creativity to devote to my work. I was promoted within 6 months, given more responsibility, and a significant raise. My boss praised my innovative thinking and my ability to solve complex problems, skills I had developed, ironically, through years of navigating my family's dysfunction. I started dating again, something I had barely had time or energy for when I was consumed with maintaining the family home and meeting everyone else's needs. I went on coffee dates, dinner dates, even a weekend hiking trip to the nearby mountains. Nothing serious developed right away, but I was learning to be open to possibilities, to believe that I deserved happiness and companionship, that my worth wasn't tied to how much I sacrificed for others. Sometimes, late at night, I would think about the house, about the memories it held, both good and bad. I would remember my grandfather sitting on the front porch, telling me stories. I would remember painting those walls, believing I was building something permanent, something that would always be mine. And I would feel a deep sadness for what was lost, not just the physical structure, but the family I had thought I had, the parents I had believed loved me unconditionally. But alongside that sadness was something else. A quiet pride in myself for standing up, for refusing to be erased, for fighting for what was rightfully mine, even when it cost me relationships I had valued. I had learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most can hurt you the deepest, and that recognizing that truth and acting on it isn't betrayal, it's survival. I never did reach out to my parents or Tara, and they eventually stopped trying to contact me. The legal battle was over, the house was sold, and there was nothing left to fight about. We had all moved on to separate lives, connected by blood, but no longer bound by anything resembling a family. And while that reality was painful in some ways, in others it was freeing. I no longer had to wonder if I was doing enough, giving enough, sacrificing enough. I no longer had to watch Tara receive credit for my work or listen to my parents diminish my contributions. I was finally truly free. The news about Tara's financial struggles didn't bring me any particular joy or satisfaction, but it certainly felt just and fair, like the universe was finally balancing the scales. She had foolishly assumed she could simply take what wasn't rightfully hers, walk into a life I had built, and now she was learning the hard way about the real cost of that arrogance, that sense of entitlement she had always carried. I found myself occasionally picturing her in her polished, perfect California life, sitting at some sleek desk signing mortgage papers with expensive pen, maybe finally regretting the cruel words she had said to me that day in the empty house. But I didn't allow myself to dwell on those thoughts for long, or let them consume my energy. My focus was firmly directed forward, toward building my own future, not backward on her struggles or her problems. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences, just like everyone else. My parents faced their own significant fallout from the entire situation. Without the house they had tried to control and manipulate, they had been forced to move into a small, cramped rental property on the far edge of Burlington, a modest place that was a far cry from the spacious, comfortable home they had tried so desperately to control and give away. Word of what had happened spread quickly through our tight-knit community, the way news always does in smaller cities where everyone knows everyone else. Neighbors like Mrs. Linda and Mr. William, who had supported me and witnessed my years of dedication to that house, didn't hold back their profound disappointment in my parents' actions. They had always respected my parents, had considered them good people, and learning the truth about how they had deliberately hidden my grandfather's clear wishes and betrayed their own daughter had genuinely shocked them. My parents' reputation in the community, once solid and well-established, crumbled quickly as more and more people learned the real story of what they had done. They were struggling financially as well, facing serious money problems with no property left to leverage for loans or security, and with legal fees rapidly piling up from their failed, desperate attempts to contest the sale and overturn what had been done. I didn't know all the specific details of their financial situation, and honestly, I didn't want to know. I had spent enough years worrying about their problems, fixing their mistakes, covering their expenses. Their choices had led them directly to this difficult place, and I was finally completely done carrying their burden on my shoulders. Kristen became my true anchor during this transitional period, checking in with me regularly, her sharp lawyer instincts always alert and protective. She had skillfully finalized all the legal proceedings, ensuring the sale stood firm and solid, and that my rights were fully protected from any future challenges. Over coffee one afternoon at our favorite cafe, she grinned at me with genuine pride and said, "You're so much stronger than they ever gave you credit for, Monica." I smiled back at her, feeling the deep truth of those words resonating within me. I had spent so many years consistently undervaluing myself, pouring absolutely everything I had, my time, my money, my energy, my love, into a house I had mistakenly thought defined my worth and my place in the world. But this entire painful ordeal had taught me something much deeper and more valuable. My true worth as a person wasn't tied to that physical place or to my parents' approval or to how much I sacrificed for others. It was found in my ability to stand up for myself, to draw a firm line when necessary, to choose myself even when it was incredibly difficult. Setting healthy boundaries had been the hardest lesson I had ever learned in my life. Cutting contact with my family wasn't about anger or revenge or bitterness. It was about protecting my peace, preserving my mental health, safeguarding the life I was trying to build. I had given too much for too long, trying desperately to please a family that simply didn't see me, didn't value me the way they should have. Now I knew better. Now I understood that you can't make people appreciate you or love you the way you deserve, and that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away. I walked through the familiar Burlington streets on pleasant evenings, past the beautiful lakefront where I had spent so much time as a child with my grandfather, feeling noticeably lighter and freer than I had in years. The life I was actively building wasn't perfect. Far from it, actually, but it was genuinely mine, built entirely on my own terms, according to my own values and desires. I wasn't living for anyone else's expectations anymore, wasn't trying to earn love through sacrifice, wasn't waiting for approval that would never come. For the first time in my adult life, I was learning what it felt like to be truly free, to make choices based solely on what I wanted and needed, not on what would make someone else happy or what would keep the peace in a dysfunctional family. And while the journey to get here had been painful and difficult, filled with betrayal and loss, I wouldn't change it now, because that struggle had transformed me, had shown me my own strength, had taught me that I could survive even when the people I loved most turned against me. I was finally becoming the person my grandfather had always believed I could be, strong, independent, and unafraid to stand up for what was right, even when it cost me everything I thought I wanted.